that Pontius Pilate was in regular communication with Jesus' father, who happened to be the Emperor Tiberius.
Whoa,
We find lots of references where we see that Jesus was born out of wedlock, so was Thomas, twins, in Rome, when Mary, the mother of the two boys, who was a princess in her own right, connected very closely to the Herod family, and Tiberius came back from campaigns in Germany and obviously had a fling or even a deeper love affair with Mary, who was in actual fact an heir to the Herod dynasty. I'm not going to pull out all the references because I'll be here all night. So we have a situation where we have twin boys born in 7 BC in Augustus's palace in Rome, and where Tiberius in 8 BC had returned from Germany, being an extremely successful general, and he had obviously had a liaison with Mary, who was 17 years old at that time. And so you then find all sorts of connections here, which are supporting the importance of Augustus's palace and what was going on there, and the role of Tiberius. Of all the people who wrote about Jesus, Tiberius produced the most numerous documents and accurate reports of Jesus over his lifetime. And we find Tiberius going with Jesus to India, to the Far East, to Taxila in northern India, the most important university town for Buddhists. And clearly they were in constant contact with each other for the rest of their lives. But the interesting point is that Augustus, who was the emperor, they were always very keen to look for and find people who could run the various client states, or whatever you call it, and run them in the interests of Rome and run them well. And what Augustus decided to do was to send Jesus and Thomas, when they were quite young, at 12 years of age, to Britain to be adopted by Tenvantius, who was the most important king in central Britain. And Tenvantius, his tribes were the Catulevorni. So Jesus and Thomas, at the age of 12, under the instructions of Augustus, arrived in Britain. And one of the reasons for that was that Tenvantius's two sons, Sinbadin and Lear, had both been killed fighting for the Romans, and they had been previous attendees at the court of Augustus. And so Augustus was rectifying a problem and putting two brilliant young men, because they were getting a fantastic education, and putting those two boys back in Britain at the age of 12, where we find Jesus being appointed a Pendragon, King of Kings, by the Druids who ran things, and taking over as king of in fact, not only the Catulevorni, but also the tribe at Colchester with the Trinovantes, and Jesus brought a peace treaty between those two, and was the most important king in Britain. He was appointed to the title of literally King of Kings, effectively, in Britain. He was so highly regarded. And so what we have, having been appointed by the Druid Council for the whole of Britain, we have Jesus when he arrives in Judea to preach what he's
This is the
teaching.
missing. Sorry to Edmund. This is the missing years between Jesus as a young man and when he comes back in the Gospels at the age of 30 odd.
Yes,
There's a whole storyline or narrative missing. This is what we're referring to now, is it?
that's right. And the point is that what actually happened was that Tiberius wanted Jesus and Thomas. They'd done such a good job in Britain that Tiberius wanted them to try and sort out problems in Judea. So when Jesus arrived in Judea, nobody knew him, nobody recognized him. And the key to the whole thing is the Sermon on the Mount. Now, the Sermon on the Mount, which was given out at Copernicum on the edge of what became later Lake Tiberias, and that was a pure Druid statement about religion, very clearly evidenced by a wonderful man who wrote one of the most important books about Druidism, and the Reverend Morgan, and gives us the clues that Jesus, in fact, was preaching Druidism. And Druidism was far more sophisticated than anybody realizes, extremely important, extremely old. And Morgan makes the point that the message that Jesus was preaching when he arrived at Copernicum, his first major teaching to the local people, was a Druid message. Well, that shouldn't surprise anybody if they look at the background of what was happening in Britain. The difficulty with these two chaps is that their message gets distorted in several different directions, and that spoils, if you like, the reality of the story. Now, Jesus did not die on the cross. What he actually did, and this is referenced by a lot of people, he was within 3 days of the crucifixion teaching his inner circle of disciples, which consisted of men and women. And what he was teaching them in the various weeks after the crucifixion was what I'm holding up in the air. You can't see it, but it's a book called The Path of Light. And these are the mystical discourses spoken by Jesus of Nazareth to his inner circle of disciples on the Mount of Olives, recorded and witnessed by the disciple scribes Matthew, Philip, and Thomas, like a legal document, and they consisted of both men and women. Now, those teachings, which are called the Path of Light, don't appear to about 1740, 1750, and they come out under the Bruce and Askew codices, which weren't found until then. And so we actually have very, very clear message, which all those people who can understand the more spiritual nature of the Druid religion and the religion Jesus is teaching. That's in this particular document, and it says witnessed by the disciple scribes Matthew, Philip, and Thomas, in the same way that a legal document would be presented. So Jesus did not die on the cross. He was in constant contact with his twin brother Thomas, and Jesus plays a very important role in Britain. He makes sure that Caractacus, who is Jesus' son, is looked after in Rome and actually has a palace, and that all the family are looked after. Grandchild becomes Linus, the first Bishop of Rome, and the British Palace is the central meeting point for Christianity. And there's a whole list of attachments here. This, of course, is after Caractacus has led the armies in the west of Britain, and making it a nuisance of himself to the Roman, senior Roman general, because there was still very bad feeling between the Romans and the British, principally on the back of the problems created in dealing with Boadicea. Boadicea's husband, Prasutagus, in actual fact, left half his properties and land in East Anglia to the Roman emperor. And then the people, we had these, a lot of very good men were killed and died, and we ended up with a whole batch of absolutely disgraceful Roman emperors who unwound nearly all the good work that had been done. But of course, by that time, Jesus and Thomas had gone back to Judea and were helping to solve problems there. There's lots of lovely examples of how this all works out, and the story of Jesus and Thomas that I put together over about 20 years fits very, very well into this whole picture. And what we have, of course, is a lot of very corrupt people who are only too keen to disrupt what's going on. Just give you one little example. Thomas was married to the daughter of King Abgar V from Edessa. Edessa was the original home of Abraham, just over the border on the great Silk Road. There's a letter where Jesus receives a letter from King Abgar V. This is very well recorded. It's in the Vatican Library. And King Abgar V writes to Jesus and says, "Look, I've got an illness. I wonder, can you come and heal me?" And Jesus writes back, and that letter can be actually seen. It's in the Vatican Library. And what Jesus says to Abgar is, "Well, I can't come and see you, but I will send one of my disciples because I have a lot of work to do here and have to report back to he who sent me." Now, the he who sent him was, of course, his father, Tiberius. When we have the time of the crucifixion, we actually have Pontius Pilate writing letters to Tiberius, keeping him in touch with everything that is going on the Temple Mount and everything else. So Tiberius made sure that it looked, he produced a lot of blood to make it look as though Jesus had been flogged. His guards were in fact Scots guards, because they'd been educated at Forthingall in Scotland at a Druid academy, and therefore Tiberius, as the Roman prefect in Jerusalem, would have had nothing to do with a Jew or anybody of no status, so to speak, but he took a tremendous interest and was involved in making sure that Jesus suffered a minimum amount of stress and suffering, and that he was fit and able after 3 days to continue his teaching to his inner circle of disciples. Several other messages there come out of the text which show that the important roles and connections of Jesus and Thomas to the Essene, and the court of Herod. And Herod really was a very, very powerful client king of the Romans. And there are all sorts of links here. But when you look at the material that I'm talking about, and I actually take it step by step, stage by stage, it all stands up very well. You've even got people like Geoffrey of Monmouth, who the church didn't like him very much, but Geoffrey of Monmouth thought Jesus was Augustus's grandson. There are a whole string of very valuable clues which tell us there is a far more important story. And the last part of that story, which I deal with in this particular presentation, Jesus and Thomas, is the fact that Muhammad was learning his Christianity at the St. Catherine's Monastery Library, which was not very far from Petra. Petra was the great trading centre, and Islam mistook Mecca for Becca, which is in the Bekaa Valley, and that they all turned round and faced Petra being the most important trading centre at that time. And that was why Muhammad was very close to the Christians at St. Catherine's Monastery Library. The other interesting thing about Muhammad, he was so taken by the monks at St. Catherine's Monastery Library that before he died, he had issued 3 fatwas that Muslims should have equal respects for those, what I call the Christians of Jesus and Thomas. Our problems came about when we had Catholic Church muscling in on the story, and they made sure that we've lost so much of the important message which we should all be reminded of. And as you probably realise, the one thing that Druids were peacemakers, far more sophisticated than any other religion, going back to Thoth, the Atlantean, with missionaries from Sidon going from Sidon to Britain in just around about 4000 BC. And Thoth was described as the Atlantean. And we got all those connections. And when we left Druidism, which covered nearly all of Europe and most parts of the world, 1,000 years, 2,000 years before Jesus, then we've actually got the only religion which preached or taught non-violence and peace. Since then, we've had so many people pick up all the different angles from the what I call the new religions, and it's totally lost its way. And it's something that we can put right if we actually look at the real records and what actually was said and taught and happened post Jesus. Very important.
Where was the last holdout of the Druids? Was it Anglesey?
It was said to be Anglesey because that was where so many of them retreated to when the Romans started throwing their weight around. And as I say, what all that was happening in Britain at that time was that the Romans had behaved so badly to Boadicea and her daughters, and they'd lost control thanks to people like Nero, who was in charge. And a big army went to meet Boadicea's army on the way to Anglesey, and they just behaved incredibly badly. And that was the way that Romans dealt with most of the things they're involved with.
Would that have been the Battle of Watling Street?
Yes, that was the Battle of Watling Street, but they'd gone to those leaders of British religion, if you like, had gone to Anglesey to kill every Druid they possibly could. And up to that time, Druids were the peacemakers. That was the big belief system across the world.
Just, Edmund, just to go back to the beginning where you talked about Jesus coming to Britain in the first place. I'm just trying to get sort of an idea of what's going on there because, well, I'm sort of speaking purely from the what you'd call like the mainstream history, I guess you'd call it. But we have Julius Caesar coming and having a bit of an excursion to the UK in what 40 odd BC, I guess, and then you've got Claudius dipping his toe in at some point. You know, at this stage, Britain isn't like a Roman province yet. So is Jesus coming over before Britain is made a province of Rome then?
Jesus pulled the whole country round and made a great success of trade and everything. The point about Julius Caesar was that he had two battles which he didn't do very well at. It was the work of Augustus that brought the peace that was needed. And by the time that Jesus had left Britain, he left it in extremely good state. And so the damage was done by Suetonius and others who took over under the Roman leaders who didn't know their history, didn't realize what a good job had been done by their predecessors, and this is a breakdown, if you like, of law and order brought about by the Romans after so much good had been done and so much had been achieved by Jesus and his family.
And this good that is achieved that you mentioned. This is happening after Calvary.
No, it's happening. All the good was done between Jesus going to Britain at the age of 13 and leaving Britain to go to Judea and solve problems there.
Right.
When he was 29.
Right. So he goes as a teenager. That's where the gospel stories sort of miss everything. That's when he goes to Britain, and that's when he's trained in the Druidic arts, if you like.
Yeah.
And then when he leaves and returns to Judea, that's where the gospel stories pick up, and they tell us he starts his missionary.
Yeah.
So
then you've got this very important group of people called the Essene. The court of Herod was very much involved with the Essene. We've got the story of John the Baptist, etc. But there were three main groups, which were the Essene, the Sadducees, and the Pharisees. And the people who were tending to cause most of the trouble were the Pharisees and Sadducees, who were they were exploiting every angle on money and taxes in Jerusalem, and that's why they were.
That's why he flipped the tables.
Yeah.
He turned the house of God into a den of thieves.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, I suppose a lot of people who maybe aren't so familiar with the Christianity, the gospel stories, they'll all have heard about Pontius Pilate and Pontius Pilate ordering the execution, but it's the Sanhedrin, isn't it, who are gunning for Jesus. I'm again, I'm just talking from the traditional, what I know of the traditional stories. And from what you read, when you read into the Gospels, you sort of getting the idea that Pontius Pilate was doing everything he could to get out of signing the death warrant.
He only had 120 troops in Jerusalem to try and maintain law and order when Jerusalem was overflowing with maybe 1 million, 2 million people.
Yeah, because it's Passover, isn't it? So everyone's going to Jerusalem. It's like a festival. It's like, the Mount of Olives. So there've been people camping all over the Mount of Olives and having fires and stuff. It was the population of Jerusalem, like I said, it just went up massively. So then when you have, the Sanhedrin, Jesus goes to the temple, starts kicking off. The Sanhedrin are like, we need to get him. It's like civil unrest. There's a massive potential for civil unrest. And we know that happened later on as well with the revolt in 70 AD, and it had happened previously as well. And there's like this religious fervour surrounding this period of time in the year. Tensions are rising, and it's like a powder keg.
Yeah, just before Jesus went to Rome, we hear the story of him being taken into Rome by his parents. They'd been educated by their uncle, well, actually Joseph of Arimathea, or Arimathea, which means it was a title rather than a name. And we have a situation where Jesus had already had a fantastic education with Philo of Alexandria, who was an Essene or a Pythagorean, much the same. Yeah. So Jesus went into that temple at the age of 12, 13, and was able to engage with all the senior temple priests on how politics should run and what good government was all about, because that's what he learned all about, both with the court of Augustus and with his stepfather, Joseph of Arimathea. Well, the other point, of course, is that Arimathea, nobody can find the town of Arimathea, it doesn't appear. But Arimathea, the word Arimathea should have been pronounced Ha-Rama-Theo. And Ha-Rama-Theo was the title given to Joseph of Arimathea's grandfather for running the trade routes for a string of Roman emperors. It was a title. And so Joseph's family, instead of being poor people living in stables, they actually ran the trade routes for the Romans. Very, very important point. And Jesus' half-brother ran the shipyards at Joppa, which was regarded as the gateway to Jerusalem. And so they had a shipbuilding operation, and they also had cedar forests, and that was all connected to the family, Jesus' family. And then we have the question of Joseph of Arimathea, or Joseph Arimathea, actually being a member of the Sanhedrin.
Yep.
Very important. Yep. And when we go through all the fine texts and look at all the various features, a whole different story comes out of the woodwork, which is great. It's all good news for all of us to see, and what's really going on, and how over the thousands of years we've all been hoodwinked by rumor, by innuendo, by people who never really knew what was going on, and you can pick this up when you go through and read the works of all the various historians. I've been doing this particular subject was so interesting, and I worked very closely with Lawrence Gardner, who was somebody on the ball on a lot of these things. And so we have got a fantastic story to tell. It's as simple as that, and the sooner it's told, the better.
Yeah, there's a few interesting ideas about Joseph of Arimathea and him having to leave quick sharp because of his position in the Sanhedrin. I mean, where do you stand on, because I've heard theories about him and Mary Magdalene going to the south of France, where we see these churches of the Black Madonna dotted about all over the place. And then there's what I've also heard, the theory of Joseph of Arimathea coming to the UK and establishing the sort of the forerunner to Glastonbury Abbey. Is there any? Have you come across any of that sort of stuff in your research?
Yes, there's lots of references there which help my overall story. Very important. And Joseph, of course, running the trade routes for the Romans and making regular visits to Britain, and Britain being very, very important because of minerals and iron and all sorts of other things, and the connections with Glastonbury. We find all sorts of connected clues there. We find, for example, Joseph of Arimathea, joint founder of a church at Glastonbury and a church at Llanillid, which is in South Wales. South Wales was bursting with coal and iron and everything else. And these were very, very high-powered people. They were involved in trade and everything to do with trade, and it shouldn't be diminished in any way. And this is where it begins to become really interesting, when you see the family connections, and you see this man Joseph of Arimathea ending up by being a senior member of the Sanhedrin. Now, how did he get that job if he wasn't involved in the higher politics of the area?
Absolutely, yeah. Oh, and what about the Mary Magdalene? Where does she fit in with your narrative?
Well, Robert Graves considers that Mary Magdalene, the mother of Jesus, was entitled to an inheritance.
The mother of Jesus, Mary Magdalene.
Sorry, I'm jumping ahead of you.
Right.
Jesus' mother Mary,
right,
who had the liaison at the court of Herod in Rome with Tiberius Caesar. She was in fact related to the Herod family, and Robert Graves provides the evidence that she was due to inherit a major part of the Herod Great's legacy. That's just one of the things that connect her to that very high level of social connections. Mary Magdalene arrives on the scene as a wife of Jesus when he goes back to Judea, and she produces 3 children by Jesus, and then she eventually does retire to southern France. So there's a lot in that particular story. It's all connected up. But Jesus had 6 children in Britain, 3 children with Mary Magdalene, and another 6 in India.
Crikey, any of us could be related to him, couldn't we?
Anyway, there's lots of lovely stuff, and take a years to read it all and look at it all. But what we're looking at here is the fact that Jesus and Thomas were essentially teaching the Druid message, which is all about peace between all of us. Very, very important. And their connections in India are very important, to Taxila, for example, which is in the Punjab, and Taxila was the center of Buddhism. And so we've got very close connections between what Jesus was teaching and what Druidism was all about, very close connections to Buddhism. And then we have the story of Thomas going to India he had learned with the Essene a fantastic education of practical skills, which there was always the element of practical ability amongst the Essene. And Thomas is still regarded as the patron saint of masons. And he has a meeting with one of the Indian kings and said, "What can you do?" And he said, "Well, I can build you a palace, I can build ships for you, and I can furnish it." And so he was very, very competent, but that would have come from that early education with the Essene.
It's funny because if you ask the church who was the first missionary to India, they'll tell you Bartholomew. But if you go to India and ask like the Indian elders, they'll tell you it was Thomas.
Exactly. And you've got what religions have all done is to distorted the facts to suit their own particular views and directions. One of the most valuable items which supports Thomas is King Alfred, who was based at Winchester. Very important. And in fact, Thomas, when he was in Britain, was a king of the tribe, which was originally Verica's tribe at what's the name of the city? In just over the water into Oxfordshire.
Colchester? No, that's Essex, isn't it?
Yeah, and the point is that what King Alfred did in about 1887, presumably because he had all the records from Winchester, he sent an embassy to pay their respects at Thomas's grave in southern India. Now, King's College, Cambridge just can't understand it, but it ties together everything I've been talking about, the relationships. And Thomas and Jesus were having regular meetings in India. They were certainly connected to the highest echelons of the connected people. We even find a grave for Thomas and Jesus in Japan, which is very well documented. And so there's a whole range of things here that help to add to the story. And it's a fabulous story. It just means that what we've all got to do now is realise that so many religions have been giving us, I don't want to say a pack of lives, but giving us misinformation. All religions should be working towards peace in the same way that the Druids were peaceful. And you shouldn't be praying and preaching. If you want to fight somebody, you should be actually all working together to be peaceful. And that's as simple as that. And it's got very silly now, let's face it.
Yeah, I mean, religions are run by people, and this is the biggest problem. And people are fallible and susceptible to power and wealth and influence, and this is where like a philosophy can be distorted into something that's wielded for material gain and worldly gain, and this is where we have this is where we start having problems, isn't it?
Yeah, what I'm doing at the moment is I've got a three-part story of what I'm talking about, Jesus and Thomas. Now, the first part is the really interesting stuff, which I've covered tonight, and I hope that will be on my website within a week or two.
Right.
And it's the best thing I've ever done. It's got all the various quotes, and it'll make things so much clearer when you go and have a look at it. I've also done two more, which is following on from the Catherine's monastery and what Jesus and Thomas were doing in India and in the Far East, and all the connections they had, particularly with the Buddhists they wrap one with the Buddhists.
And so will people be able to watch them on your website at goldenageproject.org.uk?
Yeah, there's lots already there.
Yeah.
It's just that I've got 3 massive binders on my work on Jesus and Thomas. That's the first one. I did 2 more, which were interesting because of connections with Muhammad and India. I shall redo them, and I shall do them again. And so I'll have 3 very intensive records of Jesus and Thomas and what they did during their lifetimes. And it's all good news. And what we have to do, I think, is to make sure that people learn as much as they can about the corrections which are needed in the messages put out by the churches.
Yeah. Well,
it's all good news.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I love this sort of these sorts of subjects and this kind of research. It blows my mind when you hear things like this about different evidence pointing us in a completely different direction. It just I find it absolutely fascinating.
Thank you. It is fascinating, and it's totally absorbed my life, along with all the other features of what I'm dealing with, particularly the work of Christian and Barbara Joy O'Brien, who he was the only man. He was the world's leading exploration geologist, and he retired from being head of the oil industry with the CBE in 71, and he set about in 71 doing a correct translation of the Sumerian, what were called Karsag epics.
As you do when you've worked for British Petroleum all your life, just start doing a bit of Sumerian cuneiform.
One of our most brilliant exploration geologists, who spent 6 months in the Azores and identified the fact that the Azores were a very large sunken island. And he puts all that geology together too. But he managed to, Samuel Noah Kramer in 66 hoped that somebody would unravel the Sumerian cuneiform. And Reverend George Barton at the Bryn Mawr Quaker College, attached to the University of Pennsylvania, had a crack at it, but only got about 10% of it. And what O'Brien did was took all that information and properly translated the Sumerian records, which gives us the whole story of the Garden of Eden, the gods, and everything that was happening way back to the Holocene.
Before the Holocene, you mean back to the end of the last ice age?
Yeah, well, it includes all the evidence that was an advanced civilization on Atlantis, and that we had cometary debris from a supernova explosion at about 49,000 BC, literally causing absolute mayhem around 10,850. And this is a whole team of people led by Richard Firestone, Bernard Dallaire,
West.
4 or 5 people. And what we had was that very, very significant ice age from 10,850, and it hadn't really cleared until about 9,500 BC. That was the issue O'Brien dealt with. He'd been the leading exploration geologist in the Rocky Mountains, and when he met my Uncle Pat, who was my godfather, father of Barbara Joy O'Brien, Uncle Pat said, well, what do you do, young man? And he said, well, I've been working out how far the Rocky Mountains have moved in the last 60,000 years. And he had. And I even had somebody who was with him on the American Geological Survey writing to me and saying, was it the same O'Brien? And I said, yes. And his team found oil in Libya. And as I say, he worked himself up to the top of the oil operating companies in Iran, and took early retirement in 71, specifically to sort out all these various problems. So that's how I got involved. I actually picked up the phone one day and said, what do you know about the earliest farming? And he said, come and see me. And my work hasn't really stopped since then.
Wow.
And being a farmer, and I say I'm professionally trained as a land and wildlife manager. That was my training at. I worked for one of the biggest farming companies in the country, and I went to Cirencester Agricultural College and got all the various qualifications. And now in trying to persuade the British government that if they cannot identify sick badgers which carry TB and cannot stop spending what is now £3 billion on dealing with badgers with vaccines, etc., and stopping the sick ones from being located and kindly dispatched by the hunt terrier men, which is always the role that the hunts paid out, then we're going to get into a ripe old muddle. But that's just one aspect of my current work, is the sheer massive stupidity and amounts of money stopping best traditional practice from getting on with the job that they know best. The whole idea of a foxhound is to work the countryside in a pack, find the sick, the weak, the injured, and make sure they're humanely dispatched quickly, which is what we should do with all animals that are suffering.
There's more money in badger vaccines, though.
Well, it's the £3 billion being spent.
Oh my God, £3 billion.
Yeah.
Shine a light.
Anyway, I've got a few more blood-curdling stories like that if you want them. My problem is, I report all the facts and all the evidence from the people who've been most closely involved and send it to the National Audit Office. And I can't get the National Audit Office to break ranks and these sort of things. It's a shame. But anyway, we won't get on to climate change.
Yeah, best not.
Yeah, it's easier to spend when it's not your money, isn't it? So you just best let them get on with it, Edmund.
Anyway, I'm looking at my watch. And
it's getting late, isn't it?
I've gone on
getting
for a
low.
long while, so thank you for listening.
It's been an absolute pleasure. I've loved it, and we'd love to have you back on further on along the line. Maybe talk about the Holy Grail or something like that.
I'd love to. I really enjoyed being on, and you can read my stuff. The website is www.goldenageproject.org.uk, and then I've got another website which is britishwildlifemanagement.net, and you'll find those if you want to look up any of these issues. The British Wildlife Management website is more of an ambition for my successors, my family who take over from me, because I'm at the point where I'm just about breathing. And don't think I'm going to last an awful lot longer, but I'd love to see a lot of the work that I've done finalised and properly,
Yeah,
published.
a legacy. Yeah, absolutely. Well, all the links will be in the show notes if anyone wants to check it out. And if you're watching on YouTube or Odyssey, you can see the website address there, www.goldenageproject.org.uk. And I'll tell you just before we let you go, I'll just tell people there's a fantastic reading list on the Golden Age Project website for people who want to dive deeper into these subjects. So check that out. Okay, Edmund, we'll let you go.
Yeah. Nice to meet you.
Well, I'm absolutely delighted to meet you all, and thank you so much for having me.
No problem. Take care. Look after yourselves.
Yeah.
Okay, all the best.
See you soon. Ta-ra.
Bye.
Bye.